James Carter had seen his fair share of battles. As a human veteran in the intergalactic wars, his life had been one of constant conflict and survival. But after years of fighting, he wanted nothing more than peace, a quiet life, away from the noise of war, far from the constant demands of the military. That was why, when he received a message about a simple transport mission to a remote planet, he was eager to take it. The mission seemed like just what he needed. A chance to escape the battles of the past, a simple cargo delivery. He didn't care what was in the crate or who the client was. He just wanted to do the job and go back to his quiet life. James arrived at the planet's spaceport, an area known for its dust, dim lights, and silence. The planet wasn't much to look at, a barren landscape with scattered technology from past conflicts, but it was calm, just the way he liked it. He had been briefed about the cargo, a high-profile delivery for a private buyer. No questions asked. He walked down the narrow corridor to the loading dock, a twinge of unease creeping into his gut. It wasn't anything unusual, but something about the way the mission was arranged felt off. He shook the feeling away. He was a professional, after all. Nothing was going to throw him off track. The cargo bay door hissed open, and his eyes widened in surprise. The crate wasn't what he expected. Inside the small, sterile room stood a cage, not a crate, and within the cage, sitting on the floor, was a woman. No, not a woman. An alien. A young alien princess, if the rumors were true. Her long, glowing hair shimmered in the low light, a cascade of silver blue that seemed to ripple like water under moonlight. Her skin was a deep, otherworldly shade of violet, and her eyes, large and filled with a mix of fear and defiance, were locked onto his. They were bright, almost glowing, and they studied him carefully, as if weighing whether he was friend or foe. James stood frozen for a moment. He had seen many things in his time, 100 alien species, countless battles, unimaginable horrors, but nothing quite like this. The princess, as he guessed she was dressed in simple, ragged clothing. Her hands were chained, her face tired and bruised, and there was an undeniable sense of sorrow that clung to her like a second skin. He took a slow step forward, unsure of what to do. The woman, princess, didn't move, except for the slight tightening of her posture, the instinctive wariness that spoke of years of captivity. She seemed to be measuring him, just as he was measuring her. "Are you the one they sent?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, though it trembled slightly. James didn't answer right away. He was still trying to make sense of the situation. He was supposed to deliver a cargo, and here was the cargo, a terrified, vulnerable alien princess, held captive like some sort of prize. He hadn't been briefed on this part of the mission. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, trying to steady his thoughts. She didn't answer immediately, her gaze still locked onto him. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the ship's engine. Then she spoke again, her words measured, but there was a hint of something more, perhaps defiance, or maybe hope.
"I am Lyra, Princess of the Zalia."
"And you, human, are my captor's deliverer." James felt his brow furrow in confusion. Captor's deliverer! What did that mean? He wasn't here to capture anyone. The mission was a simple drop-off, or so he had been told. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of information. This wasn't the usual cargo run. Lyra's eyes softened as she read his confusion, but she didn't seem surprised by it. She'd probably dealt with many confused beings in her time locked away. She was clearly used to being misunderstood, to being judged based on her status as royalty, or, more likely, as a prisoner.
"They want to use me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My people are..."
"In danger. The ones who brought me here. They're using me to control my planet."
James's mind clicked into place. This wasn't just a random mission.
This was far bigger than he had initially thought. His gaze softened as he studied the woman in the cage. Her fear was evident, but there was also strength in her. Something he could relate to. She wasn't just some helpless princess. She was someone who had been through something brutal and had survived.
"I'm not here to hurt you,"
James said, his voice low and reassuring.
"I was hired to deliver you to someone, that's it."
Lyra blinked, clearly processing his words. "Then why am I in a cage?"
"I don't know."
She didn't seem to expect any other answer. The silence between them stretched, and James found himself lost in thought. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to the princess, but something in him didn't want to leave her in that cage. He had spent his life fighting wars and following orders, but now, standing before a terrified alien woman, he couldn't just walk away. Lyra seemed to sense his internal struggle. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied him closely. "You're a soldier, aren't you?" she asked, her tone almost knowing.
James nodded slowly. "I was."
"I'd been through a lot of wars, but I'm done with all that now. I just want to be left alone."
Lyra's eyes softened again, a hint of something else in them. Maybe pity, or maybe just understanding. She spoke again, her voice just above a whisper. "I don't think you're here just to deliver me, human." Her words were simple, but they lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. For the first time in a long while, James wasn't sure of what would happen next. He had a choice to make. He could complete the mission and move on with his life, leaving this alien princess to her fate. Or he could do something he hadn't done in years, make a choice based on something other than duty. His gut told him that this was no ordinary mission, no ordinary woman. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and he had learned that nothing ever came without consequences. But somehow, he felt that his life and the fate of this princess was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. And perhaps for the first time in his life, he might finally have a chance at something other than war. James didn't know what to make of it. The galaxy was full of strange things, but finding a terrified alien princess in a cage wasn't something he had ever expected. He had come to this planet expecting a simple job, a mission that would allow him to forget the horrors of war and live in peace. But now, standing in front of Lyra, the Zalian princess, his entire world had shifted. Lyra's eyes were still fixed on him, her gaze both questioning and knowing. She was waiting for him to make a decision, but James wasn't sure what to do. His military training told him to follow orders, to do what he was told, and to leave the rest to others. But something about Lyra made that seem impossible. She wasn't just some piece of cargo to be delivered. She was a person, a royal figure who was clearly in danger. He could feel the weight of her stare, the unspoken request for help. It wasn't just fear he saw in her eyes. There was determination, too. This was a woman who had been through a lot, and yet she was still standing. James knew that he couldn't just leave her here. It wasn't in him to walk away. "What are they going to do to you?" he asked softly, trying to break the silence that had stretched between them. Lyra's lips tightened, and for a moment it seemed as if she would say nothing. But then she spoke, her voice quiet but steady.
"They want to control my people."
"My planet, my father, the king, has always kept the balance of power in the galaxy."
They want to take that from him. From us. James didn't fully understand, but he could tell that whatever this was, it was bigger than the simple delivery he had thought it would be. There was a power struggle here, one that could affect the entire galaxy. The Zalian kingdom wasn't just a small, insignificant world. It was a powerful force, and someone wanted to break that power.
"Why did they take you?" James asked. "Why you?" Lyra looked away for a moment, as if weighing her words.
"I am the last of my bloodline. My family holds the key to an ancient power. one that the enemies of my people want to control.
If they have me, they can use that power to dominate the entire sector.
James was silent. He hadn't known about any of this. He hadn't known that his mission had a deeper purpose, one that could change everything. He had thought he was just delivering a princess, not delivering the fate of an entire planet.
You're not just a prisoner,
he said, his voice softer now.
You're the key to something much bigger. Lyra nodded, her face hardening. Yes,
and if they get their hands on me, they will use me as a weapon. James's mind raced. He had never expected his simple mission to turn into something like this, but now that he knew the stakes, he couldn't turn back. He couldn't hand Lyra over to people who would use her for their own gain.
I won't let that happen, he said, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. Lyra's eyes softened, but she didn't say anything.
For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, a quiet rhythm in the dimly lit room. The cargo bay was cold, and the silence seemed to stretch on forever. But in that silence, James felt something shift within him. It was a feeling he hadn't had in a long time, a sense of purpose. He didn't know how he was going to get Lyra out of here, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face this alone.
I'll get you out, he said, more to himself than to her.
I don't know how yet, but we'll figure it out. Lyra looked at him with something like gratitude in her eyes, though it was tinged with doubt. You don't know what you're up against. These people are ruthless. They won't stop until they have me.
James didn't flinch at her words. He had seen ruthless people before. He had fought wars where the enemy showed no mercy, where the stakes were life and death. This was no different. It wasn't the first time he had faced impossible odds. We'll figure it out, he repeated, this time with more confidence. I've been through worse. Lyra seemed to consider his words, then nodded slowly. Then, I will trust you. James didn't know what was going to happen next, but for the first time in a long while, he felt alive with purpose. He wasn't going to walk away from this. He wasn't going to let the princess suffer because of a power struggle he barely understood. He moved toward the cage, his hands reaching for the lock. It was a small, mechanical device, one that looked like it could be easily tampered with. But as his fingers brushed the cold metal, he hesitated. There was something he needed to know first. I need to know everything, he said, his eyes locked on Lyra's. About your people. About your enemies. I can't help you if I don't understand the situation. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She knew this was the only way they were going to stand a chance. She wasn't just a princess locked in a cage anymore. She was part of something much bigger. And now, James was too. They're called the Grivash, she began, her voice steady, though there was a hint of anger in it. They're a faction that has been trying to conquer my planet for years. They have the resources to wage war on a galactic scale, and they've been gathering allies from all over the sector. My father has fought them off, but now they're desperate. They'll do whatever it takes to win. James listened carefully, taking in every word. He needed to understand their enemy. The more he knew, the better equipped he would be to protect Lyra and keep her out of the Grivash's hands. He had fought battles before, but he had never faced an enemy quite like this. These weren't just random criminals or pirates. They were organized, ruthless, and they had a clear goal: domination. Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. My people have always been pacifists. We've never fought wars like the Grivash. We believe in peace, in balance, but that's what makes us vulnerable. The Grivash will stop at nothing to take control of our planet, to control the ancient power we guard. Ancient power? James asked, intrigued. He had heard rumors of powerful artifacts and weapons scattered across the galaxy, but he had never encountered one firsthand. Lyra nodded, her eyes flashing with something fierce.
Yes. The power of the Zalian royal family goes back centuries.
It said that we hold the key to a force that could change the course of the galaxy. The Grivash know this, and they'll do anything to harness that power.
That's why they took me.
James felt the weight of her words. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. This wasn't just about saving a princess. It was about protecting something far more important. Something that could reshape the galaxy.
I won't let them have it, James said, his voice firm.
We'll stop them. Lyra's gaze softened, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She knew, just as James did, that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But they had no choice. They had to fight back. As James unlocked the cage, he glanced at Lyra one last time. This was no longer just a mission. It was a battle for the fate of an entire world. And he wasn't going to lose. James and Lyra had spent the last few hours in the shadows of the ship, preparing for what lay ahead. The Grivash were not an enemy to be taken lightly. They were relentless, organized, and dangerous. But James had seen that before. He had faced enemies that seemed impossible to defeat, and he had survived. He wasn't about to let a group of power-hungry invaders stop him from helping Lyra. Lyra's escape had been messy, but it was the first step. The lock was only the beginning. Now, they had to figure out where to go, how to stay hidden, and most importantly, how to get off this planet without attracting the attention of the Grivash. Every decision they made could mean life or death. James had already made a plan. He was a soldier, and soldiers always had a plan, even if it wasn't perfect. He had learned that the hard way over the years. He looked at Lyra, who had quickly shed her prison rags in favor of something more practical. The clothes she wore now were plain but still beautiful, a reminder of her royal status. She looked out of place, but there was something about her that made her stand out. Even in the middle of all this chaos, she held herself with a quiet dignity. James couldn't help but admire her. She had been through so much, and yet she still carried herself with grace. She was no fragile princess. She was a woman who had fought for her survival, and she was ready to do whatever it took to save her people. "What now?" Lyra asked, her voice breaking into James's thoughts. James looked over at her, and for a moment he felt a strange pull in his chest. He had been a loner for so long, always avoiding connections with others. But with Lyra, it was different. He didn't want to leave her side. There was something about her that made him want to protect her, to fight alongside her.
We need to move quickly, James said, shaking off the feeling.
We can't stay here for too long. The Grivash will have already noticed you're gone.
Lyra nodded, her face serious.
I know, but I don't know where we can go.
I don't have any contacts left on this planet.
He had been in worse situations before. He didn't have all the answers, but he had a gut feeling about this place.
There's a rebel base not too far from here. They were part of the resistance against the Grivash.
We can reach them.
The rebels? Do you think they'll help us?
They'll have to. The Grivash won't stop until they get you.
If we want any chance of taking them down, we need their help. Lyra nodded, her expression more focused now.
Then we go. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my people.
James smiled faintly. That's the spirit. They spent the next few hours moving through the ship's corridors, sticking to the shadows, and avoiding detection. The ship wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. It took them longer than they had hoped to reach the exit. James was used to moving quickly, but with Lyra by his side, every step felt heavier. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her and her people, and the fate of an entire planet. When they finally reached the escape pod bay, James felt a sense of relief. They were so close. But the relief was short-lived. As soon as the door opened, they were met with the sound of footsteps.
Stop right there!
James froze. His hand instinctively reached for the blaster at his side. But it wasn't fast enough. The Grivash soldiers stepped into view, their weapons aimed directly at him and Lyra. Lyra gasped, but James kept his cool. He'd been in situations like this before. He had fought in wars where enemies outnumbered him by 100 to 1. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about protecting someone who couldn't protect herself.
"We don't want any trouble," James said, trying to keep his voice steady.
"We're just leaving." They knew who Lyra was. She wasn't just any alien. She was a princess, the last of her kind. And the Grivash would do anything to get their hands on her. "You won't be leaving," one of the soldiers said, his voice cold and emotionless.
"You'll come with us."
James didn't have time to argue. He'd been in situations like this before, and he knew exactly what to do. Without a second thought, he grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the nearest escape pod. The Grivash soldiers shouted at them, but it was too late. James slammed his hand onto the pod's release button, and within seconds, they were free. The pod shot into the sky, its engines roaring to life as they left the ship behind. James could feel the force of the launch press against his back as the planet fell away beneath them. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "We made it," she said, her voice shaky. "But for how long?" James didn't have an answer for her. He didn't know how long they would have before the Grivash caught up to them, but he wasn't going to stop now. They were out of immediate danger, but the road ahead would be far from easy. "We'll keep moving," James said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "We have to get to the rebels. They're our best shot." Lyra nodded, her face determined. "Then let's go." The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, James felt like he was fighting for something more than just survival. He was fighting for someone who mattered, someone who had a future, and whose future was now in his hands, and that was something he was willing to fight for. The escape pod hurtled through the void of space, a small speck against the vast, star-strewn emptiness. Inside, James and Lyra sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the pod's engines hummed softly. The atmosphere inside the pod was tight, filled with the lingering tension of their narrow escape. But despite the danger, there was also something else, something unspoken, a sense of relief, of safety, that came from putting distance between themselves and the Grivash. For the moment, they were free. But freedom came at a cost. They weren't out of danger yet, not by a long shot. The Grivash would be tracking them, sending every ship in their fleet after them. And even if they managed to outrun their pursuers, there were still the rebels to contend with. James had a plan, but the further they went, the more complicated it became. Lyra turned to him after a long while, her eyes soft but filled with uncertainty. "What now?" she asked, her voice gentle yet strong. "Where are we going?" James glanced at her, his mind already working on the next step. He hadn't been a soldier for so many years without learning to think ahead, and now more than ever, he needed to think about what was best for her people.
"We need to find the rebels.
They're our best chance to take down the Grivash," he replied, his voice steady. "We'll go to the rally point they set up. If we get there, they'll help us." Lyra nodded slowly. She was quiet, but James could see the storm brewing behind her calm exterior. He could imagine the weight she carried, the pressure of being the last of her bloodline, the key to her people's survival. And now, the burden of everything that came with it. "I don't know what will happen if we fail," she said quietly, almost to herself. "If the Grivash win, my people won't just fall under their control, they'll destroy us." James turned to her, his face serious. "We won't fail. I promise." Lyra's gaze met his, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She didn't speak, but James saw the flicker of something. Hope. It was fleeting, but it was there. She was counting on him, and he wasn't going to let her down. The pod continued its journey through space, a small vessel racing against time and the looming threat of the Grivash. It wasn't long before the gravitational pull of a nearby planet grew stronger, pulling them into its orbit. James's hand tightened on the control panel as he guided the pod toward the surface. They were almost there. The rebel rally point wasn't far, but it was hidden. A small, uncharted moon orbiting a gas giant, perfect for staying off the radar of the Grivash. The moon was nothing more than a barren rock, a place where the resistance could regroup, plan, and rest without the constant threat of being found. But even here, James knew they weren't safe forever. He glanced at Lyra again, his thoughts turning inward. This wasn't the life he had expected when he first started the mission. He had wanted peace, a quiet existence, away from the chaos of the galaxy. But now he was embroiled in something far larger than he could have imagined, and the more he learned about Lyra's people, the more he realized how deep the stakes were. The Xalians were not just another species in the galaxy. They were a people with ancient powers, protectors of knowledge and history that had been passed down for centuries. Their power wasn't just in their royal bloodline, but in their wisdom, their technology, and their understanding of the universe. If the Grivash gained control of that knowledge, they could wield an unimaginable force, one that could crush entire worlds under their boothiel. James pushed the thought aside. There was no time to dwell on what might happen. All he could do was focus on the task at hand. The pod broke through the atmosphere, descending toward the moon's surface. The landing was rough, but they had made it. James quickly powered down the engines and secured the pod. They were here. As the hatch opened, the cold air of the moon's barren landscape rushed in. The ground was rocky, uneven, and covered in dust, but it was quiet, peaceful almost. In the distance, James could make out the faint silhouette of a base built into the side of a mountain. This was it. The rebels' hideout. "Stay close," James said as he motioned for Lyra to follow him. They made their way toward the base, careful to keep out of sight. The path was long, winding through jagged rock formations that offered little cover. But James was experienced. He knew how to move undetected. Lyra followed closely behind, her steps light but purposeful. When they reached the base, James knocked on the hidden entrance, a series of sharp taps that were answered by a gruff voice from inside. "Who goes there?" "It's me," James said, his voice calm but firm. "I have the princess." The door opened, slowly, revealing a tall figure cloaked in shadow. The man looked at them, his eyes narrowing as he recognized James. He was a member of the Resistance, one of the few left who hadn't been captured by the Grivash. "James," the man said in a low voice, his gaze flickering to Lyra. "I didn't expect you to bring her here." "I didn't expect to," James replied. "But we need your help. The Grivash are close."
They're coming for her.
The man studied Lyra for a long moment before nodding. "Come in. We've got supplies, but we don't have much time." They entered the base, and James immediately felt the weight of the situation press down on him. The rebels were a small group, scattered and disorganized after the last attack by the Grivash. There were no grand armies, no large-scale movements, just a handful of people trying to make a difference in a galaxy that seemed to have forgotten them. Lyra looked around, her eyes scanning the base with a mixture of confusion and concern. She was royalty, used to palaces and grandeur. But here, there was only the bare minimum: basic supplies, a few weapons, and a handful of people who had been fighting for far too long. One of the rebels, a woman with short dark hair, approached them. "We heard about the princess," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "We've been waiting for someone to bring her here." "Then you know what's at stake," James replied. "The Grivash will stop at nothing to take her." "We need to plan our next move, and we need to do it fast." "We've been preparing for this day. We've been watching the Grivash movements."
But we can't take them on alone. We need more allies.
James felt a flicker of doubt. They didn't have much time. The Grivash were already closing in, and if they waited too long, it would be too late.
We will.
Don't have the luxury of waiting for allies, James said, his voice hard.
We need to strike now, while we still have the element of surprise. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes locked on the rebel leader. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice steady.
My people need me. The rebel leader studied her for a moment, then nodded. Then we'll fight together.
We'll make sure the Grivosh never take control of this planet.
James felt a surge of determination. This was it. The moment of truth. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. But they weren't going to stop. They couldn't. Let's get to work, James said, his voice steady with resolve. The rebels gathered around, forming a plan as they prepared for the battle ahead. James and Lyra stood at the center, ready to do whatever it took to protect her people and stop the Grivosh from taking everything they held dear. Together, they would face the enemy, and they wouldn't back down. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but they would.